Hey, so let's continue talking about this. Conker, at the beginning, Conker spends a lot of his time going towards Berry, right? Most of the adventure is an adventure in which Conker is going towards Berry. He's trying to get back home. He's trying to do that all like step by step, trying to get there. And yet he doesn't get there. In fact, he sort of gets farther and farther away from home. You could also say, I think, so that he ends up going to war. War is almost like the final thing he does, really. The final thing he does is enter into the Federal Reserve Bank place and confront the final boss, so to speak. But that's like a final boss confrontation. You know what I mean? And final boss confrontations, I'm going to conclude, are included in like a different sphere of the work. That's just my assumption. But I'm sort of feeling that the final boss is not really a final area or a final world of the game. I suppose, just because there is a small amount of world before you get to the boss. There's a small amount of playable area, but it's not much. And so I see it more as a final boss area, and that's sort of all it is. It's convenient for me to say that because it fits my analysis, but that's what I want to suggest to you. And so that it kind of hit me the other day. I was thinking, actually, the final area really is war. The final area is the war with the teddies. Because after that, you meet the boss. And so, at the beginning of the game, when he's in the bar, his friends are talking about there's a war going on somewhere. And Conker's not going there. He's like, I'm not going there. That's not my destination. These guys, these sort of losers, are going to war. I'm just here to have a good time and maybe like say goodbye to them or something. And then I'm going back home to my family, to my girlfriend's house, where I live, I guess. I don't know if he lives at Barry's place, but you get the sense that maybe he does. Or maybe he just spends a lot of time there. We don't know that, really. But he's going to Barry's house, not war. But exactly the opposite happens. He ends up going exactly to the place where he said he wouldn't be going when he was at the bar. At the bar, he was like, I'm not going to that place. And that's sort of the final place he ends up going to. And one thing I find interesting about this is that, okay, yeah, so he ends up in war, which is not where he said he was going to go. It's not where he intended to go. And yet he gets there by following his path back home. Like he is trying to get back home. He's following a path back home. And his path back home gets him further and further away from home and deeper into war, which is this place that he was trying to avoid, in a sense. Okay. So I feel like there are therefore these two paths going on. One path takes you back home. The other path takes you away from home. The whole game is sort of based on this premise in a sense, right? It's Conker's bad fur day because he has a bad day. He makes a bad choice of where to get back home. He takes the wrong path, you could say, right? And so, even though his intention all the time was to go back home, he ends up going in exactly the opposite direction from home. So So we're dealing with two directions, I think. And okay, yeah, that's one thing to say about this. The thing is then, of course, that, okay, what intrigues me about this? It feels as if both directions become one at some level, because the direction with which he goes back home is the same direction with which he gets away from home. He's following this single direction that's taking him further and further away from home. At the same time, there is like a gendered aspect to this, I feel. I'm going to try and express this. I'm not exactly sure how it works out, but I feel that there is this thing whereby okay, you see, there are different ways to get at this. War is a place where you follow orders, in a sense. You follow orders from a commander or from some sort of a leader, right? In this case, in this game, there's this sort of commander guy who's this big a squirrel, like much taller than the other guys. And this big squirrel guy is in charge, and there's probably people who are further in charge than him. And there's this big control structure, and he's just following orders, and then he's passing the orders down to people below him. Okay, so you're following orders in war. And in this game, the orders you follow are from a male commander, this big squirrel guy. And he presumably follows orders from other guys above him as well. So it's sort of a place where you're following orders from men. That's one thing I want to say. It's a place where you're following orders from men. Okay, let's just say it like that at some level. There's this like masculinity aspect to it. And then Conker is in some way avoiding going back home. He, at some level, doesn't want to go back home, at least at the beginning of the game. He wants to stay at the bar and have fun with his friends, because if he goes back home, he loses his freedom. This is not exactly spoken out this way exactly, but I think that we can assume that the reason why Conker lies, more or less, to Barry about why he's staying at the bar, or the reason why he lies about him not fulfilling his sort of promises to Barry and so on and so forth, is because he would prefer, like, he needs a reason to stay at the bar. You get, that's the sort of the cliche we're working with at the beginning of the story is, I would prefer to stay at the bar. I would prefer not to go back home. I don't want to follow orders from my girlfriend, kind of thing. So home is a place where you follow orders from your girlfriend, which in this case would be a woman, and therefore there's this thing of following orders from a woman. And the other path is following orders from a man, war. And I feel like there's these two, so there's like femininity and masculinity is these two like spaces where there's like a gendered sense of which rules you're going to follow, sort of thing. And the Conker is deciding between these two paths constantly, and he's going in the direction of one, but ends up actually not getting there. He doesn't get to that destination that he thought he would get to. He thought he would get back home and fulfill his duties to his girlfriend, to his family, but he ends up not going there. He ends up fulfilling his duties, so to speak, to a male leader, warrior of some kind. And of course, this sort of this dynamic between masculinity and femininity, I think, is sort of present in the game. There's a constant theme of like emasculation, for example. So the two cogs, the reason why I can't remember the name, Carl and Quentin, right? So there's like Carl and Quentin. Carl is like more masculine, and Quentin is more traditionally feminine. You could say, like, if you were to divide it into a sort of gendered division, you could say that one is more masculine, one is more feminine in some archetypal sense, or that these are the archetypes we're playing with, I suppose. And there's this feeling that Carl really avoids becoming Quentin. Carl doesn't enjoy becoming Quentin, and Carl definitely doesn't enjoy being subjugated and penetrated by Mr. Big Cog. In fact, yeah, he doesn't like being there. So there is this duality between the two roles. And Booger the Nut is another example. Booger the Nut is constantly pretending that he has a really big penis, and in fact he doesn't, and that is a source of shame for him, or a source of embarrassment. He doesn't like that being revealed, right? He feels like that is a bad thing for a man to be, or something, right? To have a small penis. And so he's constantly pretending he has a big penis, but he doesn't. And therefore there's this feeling of, oh shit, I'm less masculine than I thought I was. And instead, this revelation of an increased femininity, to call it that, or increased lack of masculinity, is something that is like challenges these men in the game. I feel like some theme surrounding these topics might be here. And so, I could go into giving more examples, but I think examples will come up. We'll talk about examples at some point during the analysis. We're going to be able to talk about all the different things that are happening here and there. But I guess that was one of the main things I wanted to say. Just this feeling that perhaps in the game there is this central issue of whether you're going in the direction of femininity or in the direction of masculinity, and what that means, and what that means for the protagonist, what that means for the different characters. Of course, okay, the big boiler, for example, the big guy has got big brass balls, and it's a source of pride. Like, he's got these great big brass balls, really polished, nicely polished, and that's exactly what's taken away from him. And that's the problem for him, right? There's a constant castration sort of thing.